Time is always the enemy here. We have a first hour directed to the changes, if you will, in the threat assessment, and as they've happened in the last few weeks. And we have before us, of course, familiar witnesses. Eric Lapointe from the Executive Director of the International Security Policy and Strategic Affairs Bureau at GAC. No, Warrant, yeah, GAC, Greg's right. And from the Department of National Defense, Major General Greg Smith and Major General Robert Ritchie. So I'm anticipating that you've either agreed among yourselves to...
It's just Major General Smith.
Just Major General Smith is doing the 5-minute opening statement, and then we'll go to questions after that. General Smith.
Just checking. Yes, here we go.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, as stated, I'm Major General Greg Smith, Director General of International Security Policy at the Department of National Defense. And with me, I have Major General Bob Ritchie, Director of Staff at the Strategic Joint Staff, and Mr. Eric Lapointe of Global Affairs Canada. Je vous remercie pour cette opportunité de...
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you about the international security situation and how national defense and the Canadian Armed Forces are responding.
With the fall of the Assad regime proved us once again how the security situation can evolve quickly and unexpectedly. National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces, alongside with our Global Affairs Canada and others, will continue to monitor what this means for Syria, Russia and Iran moving forward. La Russie intensifie présentement ses...
Russia is currently escalating its attacks on critical energy infrastructure that Ukrainian citizens depend on.
Drone warfare and ongoing introduction of new capabilities requires constant adaptation, which presents significant challenges to national defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. We also see Russia's persistent cyber and disinformation activities, which frequently target countries that provide support to Ukraine. These efforts are intended to interfere with democracy and erode public support for Ukraine. Nous observons une compétition.
We are seeing competition between the great powers in the Indo-Pacific that includes actions below the conflict threshold, increasing tensions, and the risk of error. China is an increasingly capable and assertive actor that seeks to reshape the international system to advance its interests and values.
Is escalating its assertive and coercive behavior in Taiwan and the East and South China Seas, like recently when the Chinese Coast Guard rammed, blocked, and used water cannons towards Philippine vessels. North Korea's threatening rhetoric, ballistic missile launches, nuclear weapons development, and deepening military cooperation with Russia is very concerning and in violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions. Looking to the north, strategic competition, climate change, and technological advancements are making the Arctic more strategically important than ever before. As receding ice from climate change is rendering the Arctic more accessible, we are seeing increased interest from non-Arctic states and more assertive postures from strategic competitors. For instance, both Russia and China, sometimes in collaboration, are demonstrating a more assertive posture and using a broad range of military capabilities and assets to collect intelligence. As we navigate the geopolitical landscape, Canada is committed to upholding the rule of law and promoting democratic principles in our multilateral security efforts. Working together is an integral part of peace and security efforts, which is why Canada continues to cooperate with Ukraine and the multinational coalition to meet Ukraine's most urgent needs. In addition to the NASAM systems, the air defense systems, Minister Blair announced $64.8 million in new donations and contributions to the Ukraine Defense Contact Group's drone and information technology capability coalitions. In the Indo-Pacific, we are increasing Canadian Armed Forces presence in multilateral exercises and expanding training partnerships, senior leadership engagements, and new bilateral agreements. In recognition of the strategic importance of the Arctic, our defense policy, our North Strong and Free, recognizes Arctic and northern approaches as critical to global deterrence. Our increased spending will boost military readiness and expand capabilities in direct support of these priorities. La Défense nationale et les forces armées canadiennes.
National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces are committed to adapting and working with our allies as the international security landscape evolves. More than ever, our actions today determine the consequences of tomorrow, and we must be ready. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Smith. First is Mr. Allison. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and to our guests, thank you for being here today. So in light, you did talk about China and being more aggressive towards Taiwan. So what do you sort of make of this latest aggression in the last week? Is this a little bit of posturing before there's a change in government in the U.S., or is this just more of the same?
Mr. Chair, I'll start with a response. Again, China, sometimes they call it a revisionist power. It is trying to change the world order, whereby perhaps big powers can do to smaller powers what they want, which is why the Canadian Armed Forces wants to be more present and why we have Operation Horizon that puts a lot more Canadian capability in that region to demonstrate that we're contributing to security, and then that's not the right way to make changes.
So do you feel, given there's going to be a change in government in the U.S. in the new year, do you feel that that's going to change the relationship at all, or is this going to be more of the same?
Mr. Chair, from my perspective anyways, we have an excellent relationship with the U.S. I, of course, wouldn't speak to the political changes, but from a officials to officials perspective, we have an excellent relationship. We held what's called the Permanent Joint Board of Defense recently. It's the 242nd time that board was held. Excellent relationship, obviously, because that's the way the U.S. system works. Many of those officials will change out post-20 January, but I could throw over to my Director of Staff colleague here, have excellent defense-to-defense relations. So I don't have concerns from that perspective.
Do you feel that, as we look at what's going on over there, do you feel that North Korea is working with China as it comes to Taiwan? Is there, obviously there's lots of challenges when we deal with those types of countries, but do you feel like they're actively aiding China? What would your thoughts be in that?
Thank you, if I may. It's an excellent question. I would say, though, North Korea and Chinese cooperation is not centered on the issue of Taiwan. I think their cooperation is more related to maybe a nuclear program, fuel transfers, or to support the DPRK economy. And I think North Korea really, at the moment, is actually maybe early days, but focusing a lot of its relationship and its attention on working more closely with Russia. And that's what we're seeing in terms of deployment of North Korean personnel into Russia to fight in the war in Ukraine. And in exchange for that is maybe a technology transfer from Russia, but also other supplies. So just to answer your question, I'm not seeing the China, North Korea, Taiwan nexus.
Okay, that's great. You talked about Syria just a little bit, and the fact that a number of troops and individuals fled to Russia. So, how do you see that playing out in the next weeks and months in terms of as you look into your crystal ball?
I'm not sure my crystal ball is that that effective, sir. I do say that obviously we welcome the end of the Assad regime, a brutal, murderous regime that has been there in power for over 50 years. What we are wanting to ensure is obviously the destruction of chemical weapons and ensuring that there's an investigation and documenting evidence of the regime's crimes. It is obviously still early days. Things are still very fluid in Syria at the moment. And so our focus at the moment is encouraging a political an inclusive and political process under the UN framework to allow Syrians to have the dignity and ability to run their country as they wish. There are some, from a security perspective, maybe some silver linings here in terms of reduced access for Russia to the Mediterranean as a result of that, and also reducing Iran's influence in the region following that. But again, it is still very early days. It will take time to stabilize, and there may be still some very big hiccups along the way.
Mr. Chair, if I might just add some military perspective as well. The HTS leader, al-Jilani, signaled a desire for normalized tone. So what we might see is working alongside other parties and other minority groups going forward. Israel has seized the opportunity to move into the Golan Heights in around observation posts to ensure that no Syrian threats enter Israel. And then additionally, what we've seen from Israel is targeting of the regime forces. So the Syrian Navy has been degraded, and 350 strikes have destroyed what we think is 70 to 80% of the former regime's capability. There specifically, we're talking about air and ground platforms, and we've also seen efforts from Israel and the West around securing the chemical and nerve stockpiles.
How much time do you have, John? Well, okay, so then maybe one final question, which I'm sure needs a lot more explanation, maybe we have with people pick it up. But you talked about the North and the Arctic and the concern and the climate change, the fact to be more accessible. I mean, there's just so much that needs to go into how do we defend the Arctic. So, I mean, you know, this is less than a 60-second answer. What are some of the things that we need to start doing to be able to have a presence up there and start being able to defend the Arctic, so to speak? Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So first off, we do have a significant presence in the Arctic with our Rangers alert in Ellesmere Island, 440 Squadron, and then Loyal Edmonton Regiment. But more importantly, we need to invest, as we have in the Northern Operational Support Hubs, which will provide responsiveness and agility to the North. Additionally, we're investing in expanding the capacity of the forward operating locations that allow us to surge more capability into the Arctic region to respond. In terms of domain awareness, Arctic over-the-horizon radar is in progress with our U.S. colleagues and integrated with NORAD headquarters out of Colorado Springs.
Okay, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave the answer there, Mr. I'm sure there will be, and I'm sure you'll get eventually an answer there. Mr. Collins, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our guests. I'll start with Russia, and Major General, you talked about defense relationships, and you said you weren't going to venture into the political arena, and I certainly understand and respect why that's the case. But defense relationships can't be changed by political decisions. And we're seeing that certainly with the whole question of U.S. support for Ukraine. And there's an open question right now in terms of whether this is just political bluster and or whether the new U.S. administration really means to bring an immediate and quick end to that conflict. That can happen in many ways. That can happen with a withdrawal of support, as has been hinted for the last year in the lead up to their election. And so I'm wondering, you know, if in fact the new U.S. administration holds firm on their public statements that that this is going to come to a quick end, that will mean a withdrawal of support in whole or in part, whether that's military intelligence or whether that's actual armaments that are making their way over to Ukraine. How long can Ukraine survive in their conflict without U.S. support? I'll start with that, and I'll have some supplementals.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, obviously the U.S. is a key contributor. We've seen over $60 billion in the most recent release of funding to them, so it's a key contributor. That being said, Canada has equally contributed a lot, over $4.5 billion in lethal aid, the training we're doing under Op Unifier. There's a lot of different ways that we're continuing to do that, and there'll be forward announcements as we do that. So the U.S. is critical, but Canada's also been an important part of the contribution to keep Ukraine going.
And if they pull their support, then Ukraine could decide to turn then to its other allies to say we need more. I'm certain that we would look to try to provide more assistance, but I think that call would certainly fall on the shoulders of Europe in terms of those who have as much or more to lose with an aggressive Russian advancement beyond Ukraine's borders. And so can I get an understanding in terms of where the conversation is between President Zelensky and his administration and European officials in terms of supplemental support in addition to what they've already provided?
Thank you for your question. I think there's an active conversation that is currently going on between President Zelensky and European allies. I heard in the media this morning France and Poland are discussing maybe a potential peacekeeping operation post-conflict. But all that to say, I think the original comment of your question is we actually don't really know where the U.S. administration is going to go on this. There's been a lot of talk. Part of it is probably election posturing. Part of it is trying to shape the ground. What we do know is that President-elect Trump has nominated former National Security Advisor to the Vice President, General Kellogg, to be his Ukraine advisor. And what General Kellogg has said in the past is that, in terms of the peace plan for him was freezing the battle lines, linking U.S. military aid to Kyiv's participation in peace talks, delaying Ukraine's NATO membership, so putting it on pause to allow Russia to come to the negotiating table, and then lifting sanctions on Russia only after an agreeable peace has been put forward agreed by Russia. So all that to say is it's a bit speculative, but I do your ultimate point is if the U.S. were to withdraw in part or in whole its support, I certainly see Ukraine will be looking to others to come forward, and certainly European allies, but Canada too, given what we've been at thus far.
Okay. Mr. Chair, if I might just add militarily, as late as 2 days ago, had an opportunity to meet with elements of the framework nations, so 14 nations, including those most importantly from Europe. And we see opportunity as we work on contingency planning together for the post-stabilization scenarios. Additionally, I would just say that both the conventional and special operation forces commanders have been in Europe examining what could be contingency scenarios to make sure that we're agile in response to post-inauguration events.
Our chair opened the meeting saying there's a lot going on, I think is one of the statements that he made. And I'm fascinated by the not new relationship, but the stronger relationship that's formed between North Korea and Russia, and certainly with their participation in the war. What does the future hold in that regard in terms of that seemed to be a silent partnership in the past, something we didn't read or hear about until they inserted their foot in the door of the war effort. And so if this war is coming to a conclusion, that relationship will still exist. And I'm wondering, no one has a crystal ball, but I'm wondering what your assessment is in terms of what that relationship looks like post-Ukraine war.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll open with my characterization of the military interactions and then provide the opportunity to colleagues to answer your question. So we've seen 12,000 North Korean troops deployed into Russia. Importantly, also equipment. So 50 howitzers and 20 multiple launch rocket systems, which are pretty sophisticated capability. And they've gone, as this group knows, to the Kursk Oblast. Russia, in turn, has also used 60 ballistic missiles from the DPRK against Ukraine. And to what my colleague earlier said, we think that there's an exchange where Russia is providing to the DPRK fuel, money, and most importantly, technology that does have the propensity to destabilize the peninsula.
And Chair, the only...
I think we're going to have this pattern all for the entire meeting where we're starting to get into the meat of things, and I have to cut it off. Mr. Simard, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. You were saying earlier that it is speculative, of course, but that the USA may stop sustaining or supporting Ukraine. That said, I imagine that you have developed potential scenarios should that become the case. You said in response, I think to Mr. Ritchie, that likely at that point Ukraine would turn to other allies to make up the difference. I wonder, based on the scenarios that you've developed, how Canada could in part make up the difference, the support that would be withdrawn from the USA. Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. We are now speaking with allies regarding these potential scenarios. So far, we have a relationship with Great Britain for the training of new recruits. And we are ready to pursue that collaboration for Ukrainians. We are also examining what will be needed, the capability and the geography of the situation. So far, we haven't enough information, though, to be able to specify our plans. Thank you. Considering the support that Canada might offer, I imagine that it's less material support. I mean, I may be wrong, but from what I've heard and from what I've read, there are shells, 155 millimeter shells that should have been sent into Ukraine, but it's a complex logistical issue, and we aren't doing this as quickly as we might like. Is this an indication of the fact that Canada's participation isn't so much based on material, but rather of a logistic nature? Perhaps medical or training, training the troops over there. Is that really what we're up to? If I may, I will give you an overview. We, as many other allies and partners of Ukraine, have in place a long-term security agreement with Ukraine. So it's a 10-year agreement which underpins our assistance, and there are many aspects of it. Financial, so that's budgetary, macroeconomic, military, development assistance, humanitarian assistance as well. So overall, as the Major General has underscored, we have provided 5 million in military, but 19.5 billion overall has been provided by Canada to Ukraine in assistance. So should the American assistance drop to zero or be reduced, then we would be providing more assistance across all those categories for reconstruction, for military purposes, and so on and so forth. Perhaps I could just pass it on to Major General Smith. Mr. Chair, allow me to add that saying that it is only a logistic or training type assistance, not true. 4.5 billion, that's a lot of money, and a good deal of equipment, yes. Yes, we do a good job of training. We provide all of this through what we call the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group, 24 meetings. We've been there every time, and there'll be new meetings in the year to come. It's a system allowing all nations to come together, over 50 various states, to work together to support Ukraine, and we have good standing in that group. All right, how much time do I have? Thank you. I have read in an article quite recently that half of the new anti-tank missiles don't work as they should. And this is equipment that would have been sent to troops in Lithuania. So what happens when you have that sort of logistical bottleneck? You need a supplier capable, able to repair the equipment. Is that how you proceed? Thank you for your question, Mr. Chair. Let me say first that in 2023, National Defense procured these missiles. They were used by our allies. Quite a good deal, actually. So an update on this technical issue for you. The team immediately reached out to the manufacturer, Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, and we are working with them to solve this issue. What really counts is that despite slight delays, our ability and the long term will remain unchanged. January 2026 will remain our full capacity date.
I wanted to dig a little deeper into some of the questions that were asked before about Ukraine, Russia, and the relationship with the United States as that's potentially changing. There was lots of conversations about the withdrawal of support of the U.S., but there's also a great deal of concern, especially as Russia is now pushing so hard on the Kursk region, as you had mentioned. There's a great deal of concern that the United States will actually force a ceasefire or a new reality for Ukraine and new boundaries and new borders and so on. What are the plans on our end from either Global Affairs or D&D should that, and again, your crystal ball type of scenario, what would that look like for Canada?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Perhaps, again, I'll just start by providing an update militarily on what we think is happening in Kursk and then provide it to my colleagues. So as the committee knows, on the 28th of August, we saw Ukraine seize 1,300 square kilometers in the Kursk area. Since then, by November, Ukraine had lost 40% of that. We now think that it might be down to Ukraine holding about 800 square kilometers. The last thing that's relevant militarily is that Moscow has reportedly committed 60,000 soldiers to the Kursk area to try and re-seize the Kursk and reassert its border in advance of the U.S. presidential inauguration.
Thanks, Bob. If I can just jump in a few things. I mean, I think what's important to see, you're right, the U.S. may want to put pressure on for a peace deal, but I think it also takes two to get a peace. And, at the moment, we haven't seen, direct credible movement on the part of Russia to also engage in that process. I mean, Putin's objectives for the war remain his objectives, and anything that the U.S. puts forward may not amount to that, and so that's still an issue. In the meantime, we've seen what Ukraine has done is basically put a strategic pause to its 10-point peace process because it wants to see what the U.S. administration has in mind. From a Canadian perspective, obviously, we've talked a little bit about it in terms of providing continued support to Ukraine and our allies. From an overall perspective, Canada, as well as our allies and partners, fully support Ukraine's bottom line in this, which is peace must be just and lasting at the end of the day. And so the decision to negotiate a peace settlement has to come from Ukraine when it is ready to do so. That's certainly the policy, and that's what we'll be doing to support that objectives, recognizing that the U.S. may put different kinds of pressure onto Ukraine. But again, also, Russia has to come to the table.
I'm going to shift a little bit. Many of my constituents have family in Lebanon, are from Lebanon themselves, and are closely monitoring that ceasefire, hoping that it lasts, of course. We know that Israel's bombardment of Lebanon had a horrific impact, obviously, in terms of their future or their attempts to even rebuild back from the Beirut explosion and so many other issues surrounding Lebanon's rebuild overall. Can you talk about what Canada is doing in terms of the work to support that ceasefire, but also the rebuild?
Thanks for that. Obviously, we welcome the ceasefire. I think it's much needed step towards stability and security in the region, and are closely monitoring its implementation. We also are, in terms of Canadian support, obviously any initiative that is addressing the impact of the crisis and long-term stability along the blue line is key. Canada is engaged in a number of discussions amongst G7 allies and partners on how to support the ceasefire, the holding of the ceasefire, and future prosperity, including discussions on reconstruction. But I don't have any of those details, but I know we're involved with G7 partners. But maybe I turn it off if anybody else has anything to add. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So I would just say that our assessment is that we're likely to see increased or sustained tit-for-tat engagements, but otherwise we think the underlying premise holds for the ceasefire, specifically that the Israeli Defense Forces, after over a year of intense conflict, are seeing the opportunity to rest, refit, and reconstitute, focusing Gaza, now an unstable eastern flank with Syria, and then in terms of Lebanese Hezbollah in Lebanon, obviously significantly degraded. To your question, Canada already is a staunch contributor to the UN through the UN interim force in Lebanon. Additionally, we contribute under Impact 10 people with the Canadian Training Advisory Team in Lebanon, which I can provide details on what they've been up to if you're interested. But equally important, we've been at the table at the military technical agreement alongside allies as recently as a week ago, and we have another engagement next Tuesday where a host of nations are discussing how to augment the capacity of the Lebanese armed forces in partnership with the UN to secure the area between the Israel-Lebanon border and up to the South Litani River in Lebanon.
Go to our 5-minute round. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you for being here today to the witnesses. Early on, General Smith, you talked about working with our allies. Is that NATO, or does it move beyond NATO and include places like Israel?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So allies, absolutely. NATO, 31 others there as well. Indo-Pacific, Canada continues to make great strides under the Indo-Pacific strategy to build political relations and military connections. Israel remains a partner in the region. We do have a relationship with Israel militarily, although equally, as my colleague just said, under op impact, we're in Kuwait, we're in Lebanon, we're in Jordan, so we're very present. Sinai, I could go on. We are present in the region to produce stability, but Israel remains one partner.
Thank you. Speaking of op impact, how does the situation in Syria, as it's evolving, affect our involvement there?
Let me start, Mr. Chair, and then maybe others want to try to provide something else here. So we're monitoring the situation in Syria. Like, I think the world was surprised by what just happened. I think we all watched the news over the weekend and saw how quickly the regime fell. We are not in Syria. That being said, between forces we have in the surrounding area, we continue to track what's happening. And indeed, as was characterized, we have forces in the region. We are not making steps right now to put forces into Syria, nor are we being asked. Under Global Affairs Canada, we're watching what the situation is actually and to see how that progresses towards some type of stable long-term regime.
And Mr. Chair, I might just add that we continue to watch the threat situation very carefully and make prudent adjustments for the force protection of our individuals, including their posture, their location, their travel, and their security.
General Ritchie, you had mentioned the normalized tone from al-Jilani. Is this to be trusted?
Mr. Chair, maybe I'll start by saying it's early days, and we're just trying to assess the region, the dynamics, the credibility of the partners, to assess whether there's a say-do gap between what we hear and what we see, do so in partnership with other government departments and allies, and then try and find credible partners in the region with whom we can work militarily.
Is there any effect on our immediate effect on our reservist recruitment strategies or deployments on op impact as a result of the evolution in the Middle East?
Mr. Chair, not at this time. Our Operation Impact commitments remain firm, although, as to my earlier point, we have adjusted posture slightly within the missions for the security of the members, but we wait to see the developments in the region and how the Canadian Armed Forces might respond.
You had mentioned UNIFIL earlier. What's our commitment to UNIFIL?
Our commitment to UNIFIL is 2 individuals, and we also have 2 individuals that are under the United Nation Disarmament Observation Group, UNDOF. One was in Damascus that has moved to Camp Farwar, and the other one is in the Golan Heights right now between Israel and Syria at Observation Post 51.
Okay. So with the changes in Syria, how do we view the strength of their military after the bombardments that we've seen from Israel in the last days?
Mr. Chair, our initial assessment is it's largely evaporated. And as my colleague characterized, there's been heavy bombardment by Israel and other forces to dismantle extensive parts of the Syrian regime forces. But we continue to monitor the new regime, what they've done, which so far has seemed to be quite moderate. Very early days. This happened over the last weekend.
And Mr. Chair, if I just might add 2 broader implications. One is the Syrian development is going to challenge LH in terms of Iran pushing supplies, equipment, technology into Lebanese Hezbollah in the Lebanon area. And the other is we're watching Russia carefully. They had a base in Latakia. They had maritime vessels in Tartus. The maritime vessels have moved to sea. But we're watching their posture to see how they may adapt long term.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was my next question about the Russian naval assets. So we understand then that Iran's influence has been weakened by the developments in Syria.
Mr. Chair, maybe I'll start and then let my colleagues jump in. So we've seen Iranian influence weakened on a few fronts. The first is in Gaza with Hamas. The second is to the north of Israel in Lebanon with Lebanese Hezbollah. And then the third now is Syria to their west. all of which are rolling back what could be layered support that upon which the Iranian defense construct rests.
Mr. Belowski, 5 minutes, please.
The big question with respect to Ukraine and Russia is what Trump's going to do, obviously. You talked about General Kellogg and his previous stance, which seemed to be to freeze the front lines as they presently are and hold off allowing Ukraine to join NATO. I wouldn't have thought that this would be acceptable to Ukraine. Pawlowski is actually a Ukrainian name. I would just say that what the Ukrainians would expect would happen in that scenario would be that Russia would just build up its forces again in a few years, take another bite of Ukraine. So there'd have to be, I think, for this to be acceptable to Ukraine, to be some sort of other peacekeeping. Has Canada contemplated, or has NATO contemplated, I guess it could not be NATO, but is Canada contemplating the possibility of bringing peacekeepers or using peacekeepers along the border between Ukraine and Russia? Because I would have thought that would be the only kind of scenario that would make this acceptable, because that would deter a further attack from Russia.
Mr. Chair, I mean, I've done peacekeeping. You need a political agreement between both sides before tactical people can get in the middle and create peace, and we are a party to the conflict. We have been contributing extensive weapons. That being said, we, like the rest of NATO, are watching what's going on there and monitoring, and trust me, NATO is making lots of plans because they also share that risk that give 5 years, what Russia has proven to date could happen again, maybe not against Ukraine, but other allies, including some where there's thousands of Canadians right now. So we're paying attention to that, and it's good to be in alliance with 31 other countries.
I don't know if you'd tell me whether it was true or not, but is the Canadian Army drawing up contingency plans to possibly use Canadian troops as peacekeepers?
Mr. Chair, again, peacekeeping is a very specific thing. Did it in the 90s. There's a monument downtown Ottawa for a very specific situation. We have been contributing weapons to Ukraine since the further invasion occurred in February 2022. And normally, as a peacekeeper, you are neutral, I say in air quotes. So tactically, that would be very challenging. And as has been noted, number one, would some of the things being suggested be satisfactory towards Russia? Equally, would that be satisfactory towards Ukraine? There'd have to be a lot more water under the bridge before we decided that was even a possibility.
Your assessment of how the North Korean troops are doing in the Kursk region, it seems like the Ukrainians have hit them a number of times. There's, 12,000? How many do you figure still left?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Mr. Chair. So we don't have precise numbers. What we are attuned to is once the 12,000 were set, they were the subject of intense observation and targeting from Ukraine to try and sever that linkage between the DPRK and Russia. We continue to monitor the situation. What we have seen is that the DPRK has broken down their contributions, and we're seeing them employed now in smaller groups within larger Russian units, and incidentally, alongside many Russian soldiers that are coming from the Far East that are forming aggregate organizations that make it more challenging to try and identify where the DPRK troops actually are serving.
Briefly on the new Syrian leadership, what's your assessment of their current links to al-Qaeda? And certainly the new leader has shown some indication for wanting to take a more moderate approach. I think Canada would surely like to see a democratic, moderate state in Syria. What are we doing to encourage that? Because certainly it could go either way.
Okay, I'm going to give that a try, and maybe my global affairs colleague would like to. Again, this happened over the weekend. Nobody was really expecting this. We are watching it, and like I said, the initial signs are very promising. You didn't see massacres as they started taking retaliation against regime forces. We're seeing heart-rending things about the prisons, etc. That's all ongoing right now. Initial signs are very positive. That being said, is there any tradition of democracy in that country? I'm not a historian in that sense, but initial signs, it's looking good, but I'll throw over to my friend here.
Thanks. If I could just add a few points. I mean, throughout the conflict, while our embassy has been closed in Damascus since the beginning of the conflict, we've still kept Canadian diplomats have had contacts and exchanges with members of civil society in Syria, and obviously those have been engaging with those contacts throughout the weekend in the past few days, and will continue to be able to sort of liaise and understand what the situation on the ground is from their perspective, and sort of use that to build our information, to understand how things are going, and to work with allies and partners again in terms of how eventually we can support this transition to what we hope is a better future for Syrians.
Mr. Samar, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Major General Smith, in your statement, in your opening statement, you spoke to us about disinformation coming from Russia. I would like to know what sort of form that takes. It's easy to understand that their aim is to undermine confidence in institutions and perhaps as well to send a different image, if you wish, of what the conflict in Ukraine is all about and how it's going. But does it have any real effect in Canada, for example? Do we see any public opinion aligning behind any of this Russian disinformation? And what would that look like? Mr. Chair, I will speak for the Canadian Armed Forces and the National Defence. Yes, disinformation takes aim at the Canadian Armed Forces. Let me give you an example of an officer in Europe who died recently in Europe, natural causes, and disinformation came out to the effect that this person was killed in Ukraine by Russians, an untruth. This is a small example of how they take information, twist it in order to try to influence the Canadian Armed Forces. Do they succeed? I'm wondering whether, specifically with regard to the Ukrainian conflict, I sometimes go looking through social media, which can be, pretty heavy-handed, some of the stuff there. I wonder whether this influences the public in general, who might start to disagree with Canada supporting Ukraine. Mr. Chair, I don't have any data in this regard, but I will again speak for the National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. We have a chain of command which ensures that correct information makes its way to all the troops and that we counter these lies. But it's something that we certainly need to attend to in all communications with our service members to counter these false narratives. This National Defence, I'm sorry, I see I'm out of time.
5 minutes, please.
So there's a great deal of tensions obviously rising in terms of nuclear threats. The United States has committed $1.7 trillion to modernizing its nuclear arsenal. Russia's introducing the revised nuclear weapons doctrine, launching new nuclear-capable ballistic missiles into Ukraine. So we're sandwiched in the middle, basically, of these two massive nuclear superpowers. We've talked a little bit about our own Arctic sovereignty. However, in this context, in March, there's going to be the third meeting on the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Will Canada be sending delegates to this meeting, and is GAC currently considering joining the TPNW as a signatory?
Thank you, Chair, for the question. At the moment, I'm not aware. It's not within my purview, but I'm not aware of Canada considering sending anybody to the TPNW meeting in March at the moment.
Other NATO allies like Germany or Belgium, they're participating in that conference. What's the reasoning behind our lack of participation?
Again, this is not within my purview, but I'm not aware of anybody planning to attend at the moment.
Wouldn't it be prudent, considering the rises that we're seeing. I think the clock is set at 90 seconds in terms of that potential full destruction for us to take a role in the way that a medium power, soft power could do in terms of that move towards nuclear disarmament?
I'm not aware of thinking of Canadian participation at the TPNW meeting at this moment.
One of the concerns I have in terms of our procurement is that while we don't have a nuclear power, we certainly are building potential newer equipments or are procuring newer equipments that have potential nuclear capacity, like the F-35s. Could you comment on Canada's view on that?
2 seconds to answer it, and I think it's probably not wise to try. So I'm going to go to Mr. Bazan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank our witnesses and thank General Smith and General Ritchie for your service to Canada, and Mr. Laporte for always bringing your expertise. You mentioned that there is probably a technology transfer happening between Russia and North Korea. What technology transfer do we think that is beyond enriched uranium?
Mr. Chair, I'll start. Maybe some of my colleagues want to help. I don't know anything about enriched uranium transfers from Russia to the DPRK. North Korea, have had a nuclear program for decades, so they've had some. But we're looking at like maybe delivery systems, missiles, and other capabilities like that. Russia is ahead of the DPRK, and they may be transferring those type of technologies.
What about submarines?
Mr. Chair, what I am tracking is missiles, perhaps air defense interceptors, fuel, money. I am personally not aware of submarines.
Okay.
There may be some discussion around fighter aircraft, but we have nothing conclusive.
Okay. Now, North Korea already committed 12,000 troops plus munitions and rocket launch systems to Russia for the war in Ukraine. There's rumors that those numbers of 12,000 may be increased. Any intel to suggest that it is going up beyond the 12,000 troops?
Mr. Chair, I have no conclusive information on that. We continue to actively watch that in partnership with allies. It's difficult to see when North Korean troops may enter the east side of Ukraine. It's much easier as they're moving towards the front to discern how they're getting equipped with clothing, weapons, equipment, and then moving and integrating. But at this point, only 12,000.
Okay. We talked about Operation Impact in the region. We know that the Ring of Fire around Israel has been virtually destroyed now, especially with the fall of Hezbollah, Hamas, and Syria under the Assad regime. How is that going to change the posture of Iran in Iraq using Quds Force, the IRGC, and the Sunni or the Shia militia units that they have that they're backing in Iraq, and how does that potentially impact Canadian troops that are serving alongside our allies?
Mr. Chair, first of all, I wouldn't characterize a fall of either Hezbollah or Hamas. They've both been severely damaged by Israel, as indeed Israel has damaged. It's not my facts, but has been disclosed as heavily damaged the air defense system of Iran itself. Iraq remains having Iranian-aligned militia groups, and indeed we have Canadians under NMI, NATO Mission Iraq, inside in Baghdad. We're paying very close attention to their force protection, but more importantly, there is going to be a transfer of responsibilities from Operation Inherent Resolve, the U.S. mission, to NMI. We could see that being delayed potentially, but for now, that is they're all very carefully watching the force protection situation.
So when we're looking at the Iran relationship with Russia and their ability to use Syed kamikaze drones and other rockets and munitions supplied by Iran, with the degradations that happened because of the war in Gaza and Lebanon, and do we see their ability to supply Russia going forward depleted as well?
Mr. Chair, thanks for the question. So Moscow is indeed providing fighter aircraft, air defense, as well as space technology. And then Tehran is providing Russia with support for the war in Ukraine. Is our understanding of that relationship?
Okay. And just in my last minute here, Mr. Chair, I just want to move the motion that I tabled last week, that the committee hold 3 meetings in relation to the defense components of the Arctic foreign policy announced on December 6, 2024, within 14 days of the adoption of this motion, and invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of National Defense, and the Minister of Northern Affairs to appear separately for no less than 2 hours each with the departmental officials.
I thank the member, and I'm sorry again for our witnesses who are here, and thank you for your services. If possible, I would like to bring an amendment to the motion, and I hope that we can have this understanding quickly. And I know it's just being passed, so I'm going to make sure that... So I would like to remove within 14 days of the adoption of the motion, strike that part, and invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of National Defense, and the Minister of Northern Affairs to appear separately for 1 hour. Yeah, no less than 1 hour, please. Thank you, and sorry for our interpretation, with their department officials.
That's fine.
You still want Northern Affairs here? Okay. Okay, any other conversation? We first of all deal with the amendment separately?
Yeah, it still says 1 hour each, right?
1 hour separate.
Yeah, okay.
1 hour separate, okay. Those in favor of the amendment? Those opposed? So the amendment carries. Now the main motion as amended. Those in favor? Those opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you for your cooperation. We will endeavor to get that going as quickly as possible. Ms. Lapointe, final 5 minutes.
Thank you.
I know that my colleague, MP Bazan, was asking about the Baltic regions, but I too would like to ask a question on that as well. Major General Smith, what is your assessment of Russia's military posture in and hybrid warfare activities, particularly in relation to NATO's eastern flank? I recently went just last month and visited countries in the Baltic region as well as Poland. And how should Canada be responding to these evolving threats?
Mr. Chair, I'll start and say, so Canada's obviously got a major footprint in Latvia particularly. We have excellent relationships with Latvia and the other 12 countries that are participating in that multinational battle group, and indeed just did an exercise entitled Resolute Warrior, which I think was a huge success. The Secretary General himself was there. A number of colleagues were tremendously impressed. So I think that's an example of how well things are going from Canada contributing to deterrence under NATO. That being said, to respond to the question a little bit more fulsomely, Russia has been extensively damaged. The Russian armed forces have been extensively damaged due to their operations in Ukraine. They've equally shown a tremendous ability with their own defense industry to reconstitute. So Canada, as part of NATO, is paying a lot of attention to that and indeed responding to the plans that NATO has put together to make sure that we are both able to deter and defend in that region.
Okay. Iran's use of proxy networks has been destabilizing in regions like the Middle East. How does this tactic directly or indirectly affect Canadian security interests in our global military commitments?
Mr. Chair, let me start, and as I characterized earlier, I think Iran's proxies have been extensively damaged. Israel has dismantled extensive parts of Hamas and Hezbollah itself, and indeed damaged Iran. So I think that is an area we're looking at. Indeed, I think what just happened in Syria over the weekend is an excellent characterization of the reduced capacity of both Russia and Iran to influence their abroad, if you will. So I think we're going to continue monitoring that, both from a Russian and Iranian perspective, to see what more they're going to do, because they have shown a great ability to reconstitute.
Thank you. Major General Ritchie, what role does Canada play in monitoring and countering North Korea's missile and nuclear development, particularly within NORAD and through cooperation with Indo-Pacific allies?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question, Mr. Chair. So I'd start out by saying that we are an active participant in monitoring the United Nations security resolutions to include any ship-to-ship transfers of fuel or technology. Over a cumulative commitment, we've had 12 maritime patrol aircraft that have undertaken missions, as well as 11 warships. Most recently, it happened with maritime patrol aircraft in October, and then a warship just last month. We continue to monitor, and we are from time to time having interactions with PRC, Chinese aircraft or vessels. Those are generally speaking safe and professional. Sometimes they are either unsafe and or unprofessional. And then we are becoming more sophisticated in our ability to capture those things and then come out quickly with the truth and communicate exactly how something transpired, as opposed to to the colleagues' questions where sometimes it's portrayed a certain way, but that might not actually match reality.
If I can just add a few comments on monitoring DPRK nuclear and missile activity, in addition to everything that Major General Ritchie talked about in terms of the D&D CAF component, sort of air and maritime monitoring. Global Affairs Canada also has some extensive engagement on the diplomatic front, financial, to reinforce sanctions. For example, in October, Canada, along with a number of like-minded countries, joined what's called the Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Team, MSMT, which is basically a stand-up mechanism that has been established by partners following the fact that Russia vetoed the continuation of a panel of experts on sanctions in the UN. So we've gone outside the UN and created our own sort of monitoring mechanism.
And Mr. Laporte, what is Canada's diplomatic strategy to address North Korea's provocations, and how does Canada leverage its partnerships in East Asia to promote stability?
Well, as part of our Indo-Pacific strategy, we have bolstered our diplomatic presence in the region. We work closely with D&D CAF personnel in terms of building capacity for security, and it's all about leveraging partnerships, including with South Korea, for example, Japan, the Philippines, Vietnam as sort of key countries. India was part of our Indo-Pacific strategy. At the moment, the relationship is difficult, but India is a key player in the region, and we will want to get back to there when the circumstances allow. But it's also working with like-minded on things like I just mentioned, the multilateral monitoring mechanism for sanctions.
Before I let you go, October 7, 2023 was largely regarded as an intelligence failure on the part of Israel. Every commentator, including yourselves, say that we were caught by surprise, was unanticipated, that this event happens in Syria. Does that give you concern that our intelligence is not as good as it should be?
Mr. Chair, I'd start by saying, as you know, under the new defense policy, we have made geographic strategic choices. We're going to protect Canada. We're going to protect Canada's Arctic. We're going to participate in the Indo-Pacific, and we're going to participate in Europe. Now, that doesn't say we're not going to look at the Middle East, but that's not where we have the majority of our forces, nor is that our focus. So Canada's a big country. We're not a world power, but we focus across the world, and there's always going to be gaps. And if Canada was surprised, clearly Israel was, clearly the United States were, so we're not the only ones.
And Mr. Chair, if I just might add, we're also seeing increasingly sophisticated technology, and in this instance, it was discovered that there were extensive subterranean access routes, which Israel has subsequently poured concrete into to deny these subterranean access into Israel. But we now have to be much more aware of pan-domain threats and how capabilities are aggregated in pan-domain space that certainly complicate how any military acts.
If I can just add
would love to engage this conversation because I frankly disagree with you, General Smith. Not the first time, probably won't be the last. But yes, Canada is a big country. We are members of the Five Eyes, and our intelligence. And this does appear to be, at the very minimum, a collective failure of Western intelligence to anticipate this development, which has implications for Canada. They may be 1, 2, 3 steps removed, but it does have implications for our own security. So unfortunately, I'm out of my own time. But thank you for this conversation. I thought it was particularly rich, and we particularly appreciate you coming. With that, we'll suspend and then re-empanel.